Hello, my name is Jeff Beck, and welcome to this Getting Started tutorial for OpenShift pipelines. What I'm going to do today is walk you through the basics of creating your first OpenShift pipeline. Along the way, I'm going to give you links to other resources that you can dive deeper. We're obviously just going to scratch the surface on what OpenShift pipelines can do. So obviously OpenShift Pipelines is a CI/CD solution that actually has Tecton running underneath it. And so anytime you automate the building and deployment of your container-based applications, you're helping to reduce any mistakes along the way, improve the productivity, and promote more thorough testing along the way. So OpenShift Pipelines is a great way to do that within your OpenShift environment. So this particular quick start is going to follow a sandbox use case activity. So if you go to developers.redhat.com, you'll see there's a bunch of different great use case activities. This is well documented, but this video is supporting this particular use case scenario. So what it's going to do is we're going to actually take a application that is a quote of the day application. QOTD. So if you see QOTD, that's referring to quote of the day application. And what we're going to do here is we're going to pull source code from a GitHub repo. We're going to build the application, and then we're going to deploy the image to the image registry inside our sandbox environment. So that's what our pipeline is going to do. We're going to work through the command line, but we're going to take a look in more detail at the OpenShift front-end GUI so we can kind of explore a little bit easier. So we're kind of going to go back and forth from the command line to the developer page on OpenShift. There are a couple prerequisites. One is a Red Hat sandbox, which is a great free offering that we provide. It's a hosted cluster, OpenShift cluster. Limited access to certain operators, but it's a great 30-day free trial to get going and creating applications and kind of figuring out how to create cloud native applications on OpenShift. So it's a great tool there. We also need the OpenShift command line tool, also referred to as the OC tool. This is going to help you perform end-to-end operations across your OpenShift platform using a terminal. And we're also going to use a Tecton CLI tool, which will help you manage the Red Hat OpenShift pipelines from a terminal. So from a high level, what we're going to do is we're going to first clone a GitHub repo. We are going to connect to the OpenShift cluster and create a pipeline, and then we're going to create some other underlining resources that we need there, and then we're going to run that pipeline and ultimately validate that the application was deployed. So what we're going to start by doing is we're going to clone the GitHub repo for the quote of the day application. So I'm going to clone this repo. I'm just going to validate that it installed correctly. So it's called the OpenShift Pipelines Workshop, and it has all the underlining YAML files that we're going to go through in this tutorial. So we have cloned the repo, and then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use that OC command to log into our OpenShift cluster. Let me take a step back. If you have not already installed the OC command line or the Tecton command line, I recommend you go to docs.openshift.com. And it's a great place to not only get the download the binaries, but also getting started. So there's the OpenShift CLI, and also there is a pipeline CLI, the Tecton pipeline CLI. So those are great resources there. So please go visit that. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to launch my sandbox, which I've already provisioned. It's a simple process of registering, probably take you less than a minute to do. And you'll notice here that I have a dedicated OpenShift cluster, and there's already a default project called jebec-dev. So what I'm going to do is, in order to connect to my sandbox environment, I actually need a token. So if you look up in your console here on this question mark, there is a section called Command Line Tools, and there is a URL that says Copy Command Line. And when I select this, my token will be displayed. So if I copy this here, I can close this, and I go back to my command line, I'm going to type in OC login, and I am in my OpenShift project. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to actually create the pipeline object. So we're going to create a pipeline. Right now, I'm going to kind of go back and forth here between my uh, console versus the command line tool. So right now you obviously see that there's no pipelines. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a pipeline. I'm going to use the OC apply YAML, and this is looking at quote of the day pipeline YAML. So if I were to go look at my cloned repo, I've got my YAML file, quote of the day pipeline YAML, right here. So what I'm going to go through now is I'm going to run this, and it's going to create my pipeline. Okay, so to validate, I'm going to go here, and you'll see here that I've got this quote of the day build and deploy pipeline. I can explore this a little bit where it's got a couple different tasks. So you'll notice these are called the cluster tasks. We're going to have a task for cloning, which is going to fetch the repository. We're going to have another task that's going to build the image, and then we're going to have another task that applies some manifests. I want to take a moment to point out something important with this particular pipeline. You notice we have a parameters tab. What we're not doing is hard coding the Git URL and the image repository in the YAML file. We're exposing it as a variable, and that's because pipelines in Tecton are really designed to be generic and reusable across different environments or stages of an application's lifecycle. The pipelines really, we want to abstract away the specifics, like a Git source repository or an image that needs to be produced, and use parameters instead. So I just wanted to point that out. Next, let's go back and dig a little bit more into the tasks that were created for this pipeline. You'll notice that the first two are cluster tasks, and those are pre-built, prepackaged tasks that are available and provided by the OpenShift pipelines operator. And then the last task is essentially a configurable task that we can create to do multiple steps, to be more flexible and create our own task. So these first two, let's talk about the git clone. So the git clone cluster task needs something called a Kubernetes workspace in order to place the source code in. So it grabs the source code, it needs a place to put it, and then the build a cluster task is going to access that workspace to build our Linux image. It's going to read from that workspace. And we're going to use something called a persistent volume claim to do that in Kubernetes. So if I go back to my OC command, I'm going to create a workspace. And so now we've got a persistent volume created. Let's go to the admin console. So we're going to switch to administrator view. So in the console here under storage, we see now that there is a persistent volume claim for us that we're going to use. So that's what we did there. If we go back to the developer and the pipelines and we look at the pipelines a little bit more, let's talk about this apply manifest. So once again, this is a task that we can create to do multiple steps here. So before there's a YAML file for that, but before we do that, I want to go to the actual source here and just show you what it looks like first so we can see what this YAML file is going to do is it's going to look in the source directory of our GitHub repo and look in anything that's in the K8s directory. It's going to run an OC apply against that YAML file. So if we were to go further and look at that, this is the actual repo that we're pulling from. That we're going to be calling. In here, there's a deployment config, a route, and a service YAML file. So that's going to basically deploy our application, expose a route via an endpoint, and an underlying service for it. So let's go through, sorry, got too many screens open, and we're going to actually call that invoke that YAML file, apply manifest tasks. And now when I go in, I can dig in and I can see in this apply manifest, I can see now that the OC command that we just looked at, this is the YAML file there. So what this is going to do is allow us to do the final steps of our pipeline. All right, so if we go back to our pipelines, we'll now see that we have everything in place from the fetch to the build to the apply manifest now to run our pipeline. So in order to do that, we're going to go back to the command line. This time I'm going to use the TKN. So this is the Tecton CLI command. We're going to run a command that is going to start that quote of the day build and deploy pipeline that we've just created. Is going to pass in the URL of the source directory, the source code, and is also going to pass in the image registry that we want to use. Now notice here, I need to make sure that my namespace is correct. So this is going to be the name of my project. So this is the jebec-dev. So that's my project name. And if I kick this off, what this is going to do is this is going to start the pipeline. It's going to trigger the pipeline to run. And in the Tecton CLI, you can actually run this command. You can see what's happening. You can get some outputs. While that is going, I want to come back to our pipeline and take a look at this in more detail. We're going to look at the runs that are going on right now. So this is the run that we just kicked off, and we can go in and we can inspect this so we can see where it's at in the process. So it's already gone through and fetched the repository. It's currently in the process of building an image. We could inspect that and see what's going on during that process if we wanted to in the logs. And you can actually take a look at the parameters that were passed in. So you can inspect, there's a bunch of different things you can see in here, like the events that are going on. So it just gives you really the details of what's happening in this build. And I will come back when this is complete. All right, so our pipeline has run. It took about, say, 2 or 3 minutes on my particular sandbox. So it's gone through all the different steps of the pipeline. So it fetched a repository, it built an image and stored the image, and then it applied our manifest, which you'll remember was 3 things. It created a deployment config, it created a route which exposes the application front end via URL, which we can take a look at, and it also created an underlining service for the application. So if I go back to my topology view, I will now see that I have a application running, quote of the day. And you'll see here, this indicates that I have an exposed route. So if I click on that, it should come up. For some reason, I don't think this happens to other folks, but for some reason, it's a HTTP endpoint, but my browser, for some reason, defaults with HTTPS. Maybe not. Let me try that again. Okay, so it worked. Maybe I just didn't give it enough time to actually load the application. So like I said before, there are some things that are on here like exposed endpoints, like quotes random. So if I click on that, or I can run a curl command as well for this endpoint via the CLI, and I'll see things like never complain, never explain. And if I click it again, I get a different quote. So essentially that's what we wanted to cover here. So once again, kind of to summarize, this is the base level of creating a OpenShift pipeline. There are a number of different things you can do with this. Specifically, the next logical step is to create some triggers that would do things like tying into GitHub webhooks, where you could actually, when you submit or when you actually update your code, it would actually kick off the process to run this build, essentially. So every time you checked in your code, it would create a new application, update a new application with the version of the application you created. There are a few resources that I want to point out, which I think will be helpful. There is a great tutorial, and I'll make you. Hopefully, you can see this here, and if not, I'll share it on another link. But this is a much more in-depth pipeline tutorial. And in this particular tutorial, it has things like the next level of steps that I was talking about, where we could do things like webhooks are in here. I got passed up, yeah. Configuring webhooks. This is all in here. So this is a great resource for you as well. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully this is enough information to get you started, and you can click on the links and documentation to find out more. But thank you very much,